Who we are, we can go around the table and give us.
I'm good with is this the Ag Committee?
It is indeed.
I think let's just for the sake of efficiency, I'm good with that.
Absolutely. So if you want to just introduce yourself for the record, and we're
Sure.
here, as you mentioned, to talk about, or to hear your perspective anyway on H706.
Sure. So my name is Barney Hodges. I co-own Sunrise Orchards with my wife, Christiana, down in Cornwall, Vermont. We're second generation apple farmers, going to be celebrating our 50th anniversary growing apples at this location this year. I think my objective for requesting to be heard in this at this stage of the process is just to give some of the things that I've heard recently in some of the media publications and things like that have been around how ineffective neonicotinoids are in agriculture. And I think from an apple grower's perspective, one who practices vigorously IPM, as most apple growers do, the importance of this class of chemicals to us. And I've thoroughly read the bill that's H706, and I've dived into it more specifically since requesting to be testifying before this committee. And by my interpretation, there for an apple grower like myself, there still will continue to be the ability to use neonicotinoids in the manner that we use them, which I think is good. I am really very concerned about bee health, and all farmers need bees, and I don't know of a farmer who doesn't understand the importance of bees. And I don't understand why seeds need to be treated. We're tree farmers, so we don't deal with that stuff. But I would agree with many of the objectives that this bill takes up. And that's good. I mean, I think eliminating needless use of any pesticides is important. And but I think eliminating a class of pesticides and the things that I wanted to share with you anecdotally today are important to understand. When we have elected to eliminate the use of certain pesticides, organophosphates, and synthetic pyrethroids from our farming practice, we've done this over a dozen years ago. The reason for eliminating those classes of pesticides was, worker safety. Organophosphates are neurotoxins, and they are very toxic to bees. These are not neonics. These are other classes of pesticides that we've elected to eliminate. Synthetic pyrethroids are also very toxic to bees. Organic pyrethroids are used for pest control and organic farming, and all pyrethroids are considered very broad spectrum pesticides, killing beneficial insects as well as pollinators. So we've elected to eliminate those for those reasons. The reason I bring those class of pesticides up is, as a grower, we can choose to eliminate those, knowing that we have other classes of pesticides available. My concern when I first heard about this bill was that losing yet another class of pesticides would eliminate one of the last defenses we have towards apple maggot fly, which is probably the single most damaging pest in apple farming in Vermont, outside of apple scab disease, which is a fungus. So we use neonics in very targeted applications as a last resort towards this pest. And we do so at night. We do so when pollinators are asleep. We do so when We don't apply more than 4 applications a year, which might sound like a lot, but it's actually a relatively small amount. And we find neonics are very easy on other beneficial insects, such as ladybugs, lacewings, mite predators, things that by keeping those populations healthy and thriving of those insects, we're eliminating large uses of miticides and other damaging insecticides. So my point that I wanted to make to the committee today, and again, in reviewing H706, I think my concerns are put at ease, but eliminating a class of pesticides can have repercussion or collateral damage that causes farmers to use other lethal pesticides that might be more broadband in their mode of action. So more broad spectrum, like a pyrethroid, for example, can do the same thing as a neonic in killing apple maggot fly. But in using a pyrethroid, we kill all the ladybugs, all the lacewings, all the bees, and those class of pesticides, pyrethroids, aren't on your list of something to ban, nor should it be. I think what's really important is that farmers understand what they're using and that things are not used prophylactically, as is the case with neonics in seed treatment, as I understand it. So, I think that education and encouraging the use of IPM and encouraging farmers to act responsibly is the idealistic thing to do. It's certainly what we do. And I don't think necessarily we can leave it up to farms and seed companies to decide how these seeds are treated and whether or not they're used. So I think at the end of the day, I think I'm in support of H706. But I want to make sure that farmers like us who are using the product very responsibly can continue to do so. And I guess am I interpreting the bill correctly to see that will be continued? It looks like for certain vegetable farmers, applications of neonics post-bloom aren't allowed, and I don't understand why apples don't fall in that category, and maybe that's an oversight. I don't know if this is the format to ask questions like I'm asking, or if you just need me to make testimony specific to my concerns about the bill.
I think that your questions are welcome. I probably won't answer questions.
Right.
But understanding what your questions are then will help us to to better understand what the concerns are, and then B, to help us clarify what is in the bill. And it would also be helpful, I think, you've already probably done this, but just to be clear, help us to understand exactly how you do use them.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's language in the bill that talks about defines bloom, the term bloom.
Right.
You mentioned 4 times a year. Maybe just a little better understanding of when
Sure.
that is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and by the way, in mentioning bloom, that's great. I mean, we never, and I mean never, apply an insecticide of any type when we're in bloom. We all beneficial insects and that all pollinators are affected. So we just have a rule, no pesticides during bloom, even if they're allowed on the label, or through other mitigating ways. But what we do, so we have a pest called apple maggot fly. We monitor that fly's population through red sticky spheres. The fly is attracted to red spheres that look like apples. They emerge out of the soil in the summer and usually after the 4th of July. And they begin their flight, and within 7 to 14 days after their emergence, they're sexually mature and they begin to reproduce. or they begin to oviposition. They lay their eggs by burrowing a small hole into the apple, and the egg is laid. It's a single generation fly. Their sexual activity is from, like I say, mid-July to early September. It's a single generation insect, which means there is not a danger for resistance to be built up to a single pesticide, which is why when we eliminated some of the other options for us 12 to 15 years ago, we did so knowing that we won't develop a resistance to a certain pesticide because it's a single generation insect. When we see thresholds on our traps, we will set up hundreds of traps around the perimeter of our orchards every season, and we monitor those traps weekly. And when we see trap captures above a certain threshold, which, by the way, is usually in hotspots, the same locations every year. So we know where our populations overwinter and where our pressures are. We can target very specifically maybe certain rows or certain quadrants of a block where pest activity is high. And if we control it early, then we will apply less pesticide later on. If that pest population gets out of control, then we have to do sort of a wider blanket, if you will, of application. And so in our situation, the reason there might be up to 4 applications is if pest pressures remain high, continued emergence of a high population that overwintered will result in a sustained amount of pest pressure. That we apply neonicotinoids at label rates for apple maggot on apples. That application is applied with an air blast sprayer versus some other type of, that's how most orchards apply pesticides. And then that application is effective for up to 2 weeks or 2 inches of rain, which does bring up the point that neonicotinoids, like many insecticides or pesticides, do wash off with heavy rain, which, by the way, there was a lot of in 2023. We actually had to sort of give up on the treatment of apple maggot after a certain point because we had reached our self-imposed 4 treatment threshold that we adhere to a protocol, a third-party certified, eco-certified protocol that we participate in, which allows for 4 applications of this pesticide. So after that 4th application, we kind of have to hope that we've moved out of that lifespan window of that pesticide, and then our treatments are done. That's how we do it in apple farming. Like I say, I'm not familiar with how the pesticide is used in other vegetable production in Vermont, or field crops in Vermont.
Do you know enough about what others in the industry, the business that you're in, do in terms of spraying possibly during bloom? Would that be a thing that
it's
might be necessary in some cases?
I've been apple farming a long time. I know a lot of apple growers. I do not know an apple grower to spray an insecticide in bloom. Bee pollination is the singular most important thing to a good crop, to get a crop off the ground. And we would be crazy. It would be not just it just doesn't, there's no financial incentive to do that. You're dooming yourself from the start. It's like we had a bad frost this year, which happened just after bloom, and it killed 60% of our crop. You'd be just sort of terminating your crop opportunity before you get. No one applies pesticides during bloom. I think it's good to put it in the bill. Why not? I don't know about other crops, like why they would do that. Yeah.
We heard, and others can jump in too with questions if you'd like. I think we heard that another application method for neonics was by injecting it into a tree trunk.
Hmm.
Uh,
Uh,
do you know, is that something that
yeah,
anything to
actually,
do with apples?
that's a good point. Yeah, there's another pest called uh, it's a tree borer. Sorry, I'm gonna get the name of it here in just a second. Dogwood borer. Um, it affects trees ages like 4 to 10 years old. It likes young apple trees. It likes trees that are under stress. So once the boring insect takes hold in your orchard, it senses trees that are under stress and will attack them. And there were two treatments for that. One of them was a product. I just know it's called Warhawk. It's a horrible name, but it's no longer labeled for use in Vermont. I'm blanking on the class of pesticide that it was, but it was very effective. We wouldn't inject it, but we would spray the trunk of the tree with it. You're right. And since that class has been eliminated, um, the sale or the product, it's one of the neonic products, is labeled for dogwood borer. And dogwood borer is a devastating pest. I've had it in one of my blocks before the ban of the other pesticide that I just mentioned and I was able to get it under control. I had a block of trees that was 13,000 trees, and I estimate I probably lost over 10% to dogwood borer in a 2-year period before I was able to get it under control. So you're correct in that would be another important application. It's the only application to dogwood borer. We do other things to try to control that. There is a mating disruption for that pest, which we do every year. And actually some of the things that language in the bill talk about alternative applications, right? Like there could be in referencing that section of the bill, you might have an alternative application. And that's where I was mentioning before that in apple maggot, like you could apply a pyrethroid or an organophosphate, but that alternative application is no less harmful to pollinators and has other repercussions. There are IPM methods of trapping both dogwood borer and apple maggot fly, but they're not always 100% successful. Usually you would do those treatments like the mating disruption for dogwood borer, you would do in conjunction with an application of a neonicotinoid if you've demonstrated that you're infected with that pest. A preventative measure would be to just apply the mating disruption, and that has proven effective for us now that we've got the pest under control. Sorry, that was kind of a long-winded way but that is the boring insect in apples is another area where that pesticide is helpful.
Let's see, Representative Rice and then Representative Templeman.
Yeah, I'm so you described a lot of the practices that you use, that only spraying at night, self-imposed, 4 times a year, and those are EcoCert practices. How does that differ from sort of more blanket IPM practices? Are those, in other words, are there people who are sort of practicing IPM but are spraying more, or
Yes.
aren't only spraying at night?
Yes.
Or
I understand your question. So because we participate in the eco-certified protocols that are administered by a third-party organization called IPM Institute in North America, we are adhering just like you would adhere to an organic standard. There's a degree of sort of faith that if you're participating in this program, you're going to follow the rules, just like in organic farming. And there's a certification process, but it's not like, oh, they could test for chemicals that we say we're not using. That is a possibility that they could test for organophosphates. See, and if we're not using them, we won't come up with any, but if we were using them, we could fail that test. But it's more, you agree to participate in the program and you follow the rules. But to the other part of your question is if a farmer isn't enrolled in the Eco Apple Pro or the Eco Certified program, will they be practicing IPM in the same way? And I think to a degree, all apple farmers practice IPM to some degree, because, for example, if you're observing when bloom is, this is a really simple one, and you say, I'm not going to spray, that's a form of IPM. It's a very simple form, but if you're monitoring the weather and the wetness and the temperature associated with leaf wetness, when an apple scab infection occurs, and what your timing is around that application, it's going to be most effective. That's a form of IPM to most effectively use your use of a costly fungicide, right? So I'd say that all growers practice IPM, but not all growers are going to limit their use of neonics to 4 times. Why do we do 4 times? Because if you've got a high pressure year of apple maggot, it's going to be disrupting your orchard from when it emerges just after 4th of July to mid-September. And on a 2-week interval, 4 applications kind of gets you 6 weeks of coverage, if you will, or almost 8 weeks of coverage. So that's why 4 is used, because, and we also, in that protocol, there's science involved in making some of these determinations. When we have a pest that we want to restrict, when we have a pesticide we want to restrict, scientists get involved and help us determine how we need to raise the bar and make it more restrictive if we think it's necessary, but we also need to not put a farm out of business if that restriction is too heavy-handed. By the way, for what it's worth, the Eco Apple program, which is now called their Eco Certified Products through this organization, Red Tomato in Massachusetts, is an extremely effective way to develop responsible protocols in agriculture that combine science and public health and farming practices all under one umbrella to achieve an ultimate goal, which is making a more sustainable growing environment for farmers and for the public. So it's a great program for developing constraints around things like this, right? Like, we've been talking about neonics as an organization for 2 decades because we recognize their danger to bees.
Barney, can you just tell us who your customers are? Do you wholesale or retail? And do they have a sense of what of the practices that you work with?
Sure.
And how that might be beneficial?
So we historically we've sold directly to supermarkets in Vermont, like Shaw's and Price Chopper, Hannaford's, food co-ops. We also sell through brokers like Red Tomato out of Massachusetts, and their customers have historically been Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, customers like that. And then we also work with a broker out of Western New York who sells to the chain Aldi's. That broker very much is aware of what we're doing, but it doesn't play a role in their marketing with Aldi's. However, with Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, Shaw's, Price Chopper, food co-ops, all of those types of retail markets are aware of how we grow, and different outlets use that to the extent that they feel is helpful. For example, food co-ops are very interested in growing practices and might highlight the Eco Apple Protocol specifically. Whereas Whole Foods, red tomato has become kind of the primary supplier of sustainable non-organic produce. So Whole Foods is, very into what we're doing and uses it in their marketing to a certain degree. When we were selling to Price Chopper and Shaw's, it was certainly part of my strategy to market ourselves to them. But at the end of the day, the buyers that control those messages, it didn't rise to the level that I had hoped. And I don't think the buyers care that much. The produce managers, when we got to work directly with produce managers, they would definitely care. And, sometimes we would, it's on our packaging, we talk about it as much as we can with consumers and buyers.
Representative Templeman.
Question, acronym IPM, please decode that for me.
Yes, sorry. Integrated Pest Management.
Oh, yeah, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Representative O'Brien.
Barney, looking it up on, it looks like Clethodim is warthog. Is that a family?
Warhawk, sorry.
Oh, there's one called warthog. Who now? Yeah.
Yeah, there's some pretty nasty names out there. I'm sorry I don't have, usually
look it up.
things are right off the top of my head. I should know the class of pesticide that Warhawk is. I'm blanking on it. And if I could jump, I don't know if I'm going to jump off the screen here or not, but
I noticed that on your website you have golden russets, my favorite apple. And
all right. Yeah.
Those are famous cider apples. So do you turn any of your apples into hard cider?
Yeah, no, our hold on just a second. Our farm, we raise about 5 acres of we on our 140 acres of apples currently under production. 5 acres are heirloom apple varieties, and we use them to make hard cider, or we press them into cider that other farms like Eden Cidery up in Newport, they buy our heirloom cider from us. And the golden russets are a great eating apple. They have a little bit higher acidity, and they do balance out the tannins and some of the other heirlooms that are used in hard cider.
My question was, we had Andrew Moncrist then?
Yeah.
Who must be just down the road from you. So I wondered if you hire beekeeper, bees.
We do.
to come in and pollinate.
We don't hire Andrew. I asked him last year if he wanted to, because we were concerned that I think our beekeeper that we've been working with for over a decade has been struggling perhaps with his hive health. That's Singing Cedars Apiaries in Orwell, has been our beekeeper of hire for the last 10 years. And he tells me that we're the only apple farm that he's willing to work with. I think there's just a fear around pesticide use in general in bees. And Andrew doesn't rent high. He would have helped us if we were in a bind, he said, but that's not what his business model is about. I don't exactly understand the bee business, so I would, you must know what he does because he's been on before your committee. But does he breed queens and sell? There's other aspects. I mean, I know we buy his honey for our farm stand, so we have a great relationship with Andrew and all in Chaz Mraz. Chaz doesn't rent hives either, but I am concerned about the viability of the hive rental business as an apple grower. But I also believe we have again, this is anecdotal and this is actually relevant to the conversation. We rely on all pollinators, and there's many pollinators on our farm that are really important, and we know we take care of them just by our general practices around integrated pest management. One thing that I need help with is evaluating the overall health of our pollinators on our farm. Like, I don't know how to do that. I think that's as important as any. I think that the native pollinators, the indigenous pollinators on our farm, are more important than honeybees. We bring bees in as an insurance policy. It's what my dad did. It's what his dad did in Virginia. It's like, I don't know if it's worth it. Just because I know honeybees sometimes aren't the best pollinators. Bumblebees forage in the rain, you know. If we get a wet pollinating season, we may not have enough time out there for honeybees to do the job. So we've got to keep our overall pollinator health strong, and I don't know how to evaluate that. So as a farm, that's something I need to figure out is how to preserve, conserve, and strengthen our bee habitat on our farm by the practices that we use for agriculture. I don't think it's really part of this bill, but it is a super important thing. Like, I feel like all of these, when we have the negative focus on how to ban something like a neonic, it's this terrible pesticide. I think so much more productive things could happen if we could band together to figure out preventative measures and and incentivize conservation measures in agriculture that incentivize farmers to do the right thing. Like that, farmers wanted. I don't think farmers like using pesticides, and I think getting prophylactic application of pesticides out of seeds, I can't see why it doesn't make sense. Like it should, this bill, if it can accomplish that, I think if I understand my research correctly, that's not doing anybody any good. Banning neonics from apple farming would cause a serious problem for me that I don't know how to solve. If I thought we were being very destructive to the bee population with our 4 applications a year, I wouldn't want to do it. I'd want to find another way. But I think with the help of the IPM Institute in North America and scientists who've helped us figure out what are safe ways to apply this pesticide, I think we're doing a good job.
Representative Rice.
Yeah, just sort of tying into what you were talking about trying to find ways to monitor pollinator health in your orchard and anecdotal observations. I just wonder, as a person who has spent a lot of time in orchards over a long period of time, do you have any anecdotal, observations about pollen, the levels, numbers, different kinds of pollinators that you're seeing?
Well, I don't have numeric evidence,
No.
but I can tell you I've had pollinating seasons, meaning, when we're in bloom. I've had years where we've had cold, wet, rainy weather throughout. Going out and observing bee flight activity, from the hives being 0, and yet having a crop, right? So like something's working and it isn't the honeybees. So my anecdotal evidence is that we've had devastating environmental failures on our farm, this year being one of them, around frost or hail or excessive water or drought. We have had weather that should be really bad pollinating weather, but we've never had a failure to pollinate, with the exception of 2023, where a May 18th frost killed you know, in parts of our orchard, we lost 100% of the crop.
Yeah.
So that's not pollinator problems, that's frost, you know. And so anecdotally, I have that. And then I am trying to teach myself about the types of habitat that bees like. So for example, ripping out hedgerows and making them look pretty doesn't do your bee habitat any favors. You need hedgerows and you need cover for bees, natural bees to you know, build their nests and things like that. So in the Eco Apple program or the Eco Certified program that we adhere to, they award points for protecting pollinator habitat. And that's, you know, that's how I know that, you know, sometimes farms like to, it's fun to make your place look good, and taking out ugly mangled hedgerows might be something that you know, want to do to gentrify your place, but you're eliminating habitat for your bees. I think that I'm always observing pollinators, but I don't have any way of quantifying what that observation means. So I'm not really answering your question, but
No, thanks. Still helpful here.
This has been really helpful, Barney. I just wanted to ask you, and maybe the last question, do you get technical assistance from the extension services at UVM or from the Agency of Ag or any other conservation?
yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry I haven't mentioned that. I mean, I utilize Terry Bradshaw and the extension frequently around all sorts of challenges. We have an organic block too, and Terry's very knowledgeable on that. I haven't taken him up on the pollinator question. There's just lots of challenges every year that we're faced with, and I will say that I'm concerned about bee health, and pollinator health as a whole is something that I feel like I need to address outside of the honeybee for hire business, right? Like improving our pollinator habitat and overall health should be a priority of mine, and you know, engaging with the extension in the state to see how we could quantify that might be a great approach. I just haven't done it. So the answer is yes. I know those folks well, and be worth me, you know, seeing if there's some work we could do together. But we do a lot of work with Terry Bradshaw. When he has a research project, he'll call me up and see what he can do on our farm. So we welcome that.
Any other questions of committee members, either here or online?
I just looked at that, or it's like chlorpyrifos, so it's an organophosphate.
Yeah, that's it. Chlorpyrifos. Yeah. So that's an organophosphate, which, by the way, we are allowed to use for that exact treatment on borers when it was labeled for it. Now it's no longer labeled in Vermont, so it's not an option. It's actually outlawed. Chlorpyrifos is outlawed. I don't know if it's nationwide, but in many states. So, but there's a good example of, like, we as an organization say we're not going to spray organophosphates as general pesticides. But when we have only one pesticide that's effective on a certain pest, when it reaches a certain threshold and it's killing your trees, they make an exemption for that, you know. So that's good. I have one question before I go. It sounds like we're wrapping up. Is that correct?
Yes, in the sense that I don't see any other questions from committee members. So,
Okay.
yeah.
What's the best way for me to remain educated on, you know, I mean, I want to make sure that I'm interpreting the bill as it's written correctly, that I mean, I think if there's a ban on neonicotinoids and the only way around that is to get an exemption from the Secretary of Agriculture or something like that. That's a yet another addition of red tape required by a grower that's already being extremely responsible with his use of pesticides. And that's an unfortunate added amount of red tape that we would have to jump through that, frankly, in my acute situation, I don't think is necessary. How can I best track the progress of this bill as it goes from committee, maybe to the next phase and the next phase after that?
That's an excellent question. I will say that my interpretation, and others can jump in here, of the bill as it was introduced, and that's the only version that we have so far. There haven't been any changes, would exempt the use that you've discussed. So unless there's something that changes, and I don't want to maybe speculate out loud, but
Yeah.
I don't. No one has so far. No one has testified that we need to change anything that would affect, again, my understanding, the business that you're in and the applications that you do. You can tune into our website, not necessarily watch our meetings, or you're welcome to do that, but on our committee, there'll be a page for the bill, and as new versions come along, there'll be each of them will be posted.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing I would just suggest perhaps is to stay in touch with your representative or representatives.
Yep.
Who will be keeping an eye on things that people ask them to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's how I ended up here. I reached out to Representative Conlon, and he connected me to this group. So that's great. And I really appreciate it. It's the way the system should work, and I am grateful to be heard. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I thank you because I think it's been very helpful for us to get a better understanding of your business in general, and then specifically as it relates to this. And one other thought, another way that you can keep in touch is we have another bill that we may be looking at some point in the next few weeks or months, dealing with the losses that the Apple industry went through this past summer.
Yeah.
Spring and summer. And we may be, if we take that up, we might be interested in having you back in to speak again, or more specifically, or in more detail anyway, about how your business was affected.
Sure. Any time that you think you need an Apple perspective, I'm available. I also know last year there was quite a bit of work on irrigation and water use. I was behind the 8 ball on that, and didn't get to weigh in. I don't know if there's legislation out there this year around taking that up again, but or maybe it's already passed. I'll educate myself on that, but certainly anytime an Apple voice is needed, I'm more than willing to come forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, have a good weekend.
You too. Thanks everybody.